Good evening to all, and welcome to the third annual Institute for Immigration Research New American Voices Award event. My name is Jim Whitty, and I'm director of the Institute for Immigration Research at George Mason University. Along with our partners at the Immigrant Learning Center in Malden, Massachusetts, we are pleased to be a part of Fall for the Book through the New American Voices Award. Our work at the Institute focuses on the contributions of today's new Americans, economic, cultural, and social. We've studied immigrant physicians, truck drivers, scientists, and even Major League Baseball players. The strength of the United States has long been built on the efforts of immigrants who've come to our shores to build new lives. We are proud to join with you tonight to celebrate the work of a select group of these immigrant writers. The New American Voices Award recognizes authors who immigrated into the United States or were born here as children of immigrants. Through their work, we are able to follow their experiences, their struggles and successes. Tonight, we celebrate their stories. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn the virtual podium over to our friend and collaborator, Denzel Mohammed, Director of the Public Education Institute at the Immigrant Learning Center.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jim. It is my pleasure to join you all this evening as we celebrate the 2020 New American Voices Award. My name is Denzel Mohammed, and I direct the Public Education Institute at the Immigrant Learning Center in Malden, Massachusetts. Our founder, Diane Portnoy, helped launch the Institute for Immigration Research 8 years ago, and we are strong supporters of the New American Voices Award. The Immigrant Learning Center is a not-for-profit organization in Malden, Massachusetts, just 6 miles north of Boston. We have been giving immigrants and refugee adults a voice for 28 years in 3 ways. First, we provide free English and citizenship classes to immigrant and refugee adults so they can become successful workers, parents, and community members. Just last month, we won the Library of Congress's Literacy Award, and so far we've helped more than 10,500 immigrants from 122 countries. The second way we give immigrants a voice is through our Public Education Institute, where we educate Americans and the American public, including policymakers, the media, teachers, community leaders, business leaders, religious leaders, about the positive impact immigrants have on our economy, the country, and our communities. And the third way we give immigrants a voice is through research. As part of educating the public and informing policy, it's necessary to present reliable and valid information. So 8 years ago, we launched the Institute for Immigration Research with George Mason University. Since 2012, the Institute has documented the economic contributions of immigrants through research such as uncovering the disproportionately large percentage of immigrant Nobel laureates and probing the significant contributions of immigrants to industries as diverse as healthcare, transportation, and as Jim mentioned, even professional sports. The Institute also helps to prove how important US universities are to scientific advances and in bringing together international scholars. But in addition to this hard evidence, there are many ways new Americans enrich all our lives that are easy to recognize but hard to measure. That's why we created the New American Voices Award. This award recognizes the authors of recently published books that illuminate the complexity of the human experience as told by immigrants or their children. The immigrant experience is inextricably tied to the American experience. We at the Immigrant Learning Center understand this because we were founded by an immigrant. Diane Portnoy, who fled post-World War II Europe for survival and a chance at a future. And in one generation, she was able to start a not-for-profit that's almost 30 years old. And we hear these stories every day from the students at the Immigrant Learning Center. Students who fled genocide in the middle of the night, civil war tearing their countries apart, gang violence, incessant poverty, earthquakes and famine, even just the chance to rid themselves of the lack of a real fulfilling life. The people who chose to uproot their lives and flee are those who are desperate and yearning for freedom and opportunity, those with a dream, the American dream. It takes a special kind of person to pack a suitcase, leave everything and everyone they know behind, and venture into the unknown with little more than a dream. That's an entrepreneurial spirit. And we've seen this generation after generation in America's vivid immigrant history. That's what built America. In today's charged climate around immigration, the skill and poignancy with which Ishmael Bia, Vanessa Hua, and Leslie Tenorio document their respective stories needs to be heard and shared widely for all Americans of every origin to see. It is why the Immigrant Learning Center is proud to partner with the Institute for Immigration Research to honor immigrant authors every year. Congratulations to you all, the 2020 New American Voices finalists. We are lucky to have 3 such talented examples of new American literature. Jim?
Thank you, Denzel. Tonight, we're here to celebrate all 3 of our finalists. Before we start the event, the interesting part of the event, we'd like to congratulate Leslie Tenorio, who our judges have named the winner of the 2020 New American Voices Award for his novel, The Son of Good Fortune. Congratulations, Leslie. We look forward to hearing from you at the end of tonight's event. Thank you also to this year's judges. Your decisions, I'm sure, were not easy to make. Porochista Chakpour, Susan Muade Daraj, and Chika Onigwe all worked diligently for the last few months to narrow down the list of submissions to these 3 wonderful finalists. I turn it over to them now as they discuss their own experiences as immigrant writers.
Thank you so much. Hi, Chika. We are missing one of our judges Susan is ill today, or she's dealing with a family thing. So I just want to acknowledge her work too, but it was such an honor to work with you, Chika, and with Susan. And it was
absolutely same here. It was very difficult, like Jim said, sort of narrowing the books down, because we had an excellent long list, right? And then on the excellent long list, we had to choose an excellent short list. It wasn't easy, but I'm proud of the work, that we did, and I'm very proud of all 3 books. And I think that particularly, these days, when culture has sort of shifted the center a lot from the arts, right? And with an attack and assault on everything intellectual and on truth, and the world sort of seems to be upside down. It was a relief to have these books to disappear into for a while.
Yeah, it was honestly, like, for me, it really kept me grounded to check in with you and have your thoughts always. I mean, it was really an embarrassment of riches. These books were really, really amazing. And I don't think at any point we had to specifically put on our immigrant cap and think, oh, we're looking at immigrants or, refugee literature, anything. And the fact is that this is work that would stand at the top no matter what the category. So that's also been my dream my whole life as an immigrant and refugee, to live in a world where not only can I be proud of being an immigrant and refugee, but my work still can hold its own regardless.
I mean, the immigrant experience is the human experience, right? And we sort of tend to think of immigrant literature as literature from elsewhere, right? And but elsewhere is here as well. You know what I mean? Me reading, Ishmael's story of these kids in their airplane, living in their abandoned airplane, or Vanessa Hua's Kingsway, whom I absolutely loved. I loved that character, and of Excel and his mother, at the heart of all these 3 stories, right, is really, the human experience, just sort of people living and reinventing themselves and just sort of trying to survive in a world where sometimes they've been, othered, or sometimes they are at the margins, right? I mean, Ishmael's little family, right? The kids are in their own country, right? And yet they're sort of at the margins of that country. And I loved Kudi's character. I rooted for her from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. I'm like, Kudi Mata, yes. I think I could draw her.
Yeah, these characters, I think, will always be with me. I mean, it was such a strange year for us to be looking at this with so much turbulence in the background. And I think, you being Nigerian born, me being Iranian born, I think in our lives, we've heard our countries be thought of in all sorts of ways, depending on where your nation or continent, right? And I still, in the US, there's times that I'm like, oh, wonderful. And then I'm like, oh no, what are they doing? And it's just having this background and then having these books in front of us just for me felt so stabilizing. Mm-hmm. And, I really, I don't think I'll ever forget them. They feel so real to me. And I actually had a question for you. We didn't get a chance to ask each other questions because we were so on the task. Yeah. But I wondered, this was a question I was thinking about a lot judging this. And I just thought, because my answer has changed, I think. And it's like, do you ever think of yourself as an immigrant writer? Or is that a conscious thing even for me, now I say Iranian American with much more pride and complexity than I used to, actually. Mm-hmm. But it's changed a lot. I just wondered, how has it been for you?
To be honest, I don't think that I ever refer to myself as an immigrant, just because that word is so loaded.
Right.
My husband is white Belgian, and I never see him I never hear him referred to as an immigrant. He's an expatriate, right? And and I can't remember a single, white person in Nigeria who thought of themselves as immigrants. They were always expatriates. It didn't matter how they came in. It didn't matter what they did. And but I think that to sort of answer that question in a different way, I think that I write as a Nigerian. I write as a Black woman. I write as an Igbo woman, I write as Chika. I don't think that you sort of write in a vacuum, right? And everything that you are and all your experiences, as you know, go into the sort of art that you make, right? And also sort of goes into the sort of people that you imagine within your work, right? And when that work breaks the boundaries, and the people that you're maybe not even thinking of writing for read that work and come to it with a human response, it's rewarding, right? One of the things that has changed in the past 15, 16 years, certainly for Nigerian literature, is that we've moved from being textbooks. Nigerian fiction has moved from being textbook fiction published by Heinemann publishers, where you sort of find them in university libraries, but never in bookstores, right? To be in fiction that you find in bookstores, right? And they're sitting in shelves with just regular novels, and people are no longer coming to them reading to understand Nigeria. They're coming to them just sort of reading to sort of get what you get from fiction. And I'll ask you a question, because this was also on my mind a lot. Just right after George Floyd's shooting, right, and with all the BLM things going on, there was this list, there were multiple lists, right, going around about fiction to read to understand the Black experience, right?
Right.
And I found it so frustrating, right? And if someone were to ask you, what should I read to understand the Iranian experience, right? What would you say?
It's such an amazing question. It's something I think about so often, because I think, going back to what you were saying earlier, people read us for anthropological insight all the time, for sociological insights. It's so frustrating because you want to say, see my humanity and I am just like you. And
just see the writing, right?
Right, exactly. I think it's even frustrating for young people in Iran today, even with their visibility to some degree. Now they have proxy servers and they can go on the internet with difficulty, but they're still around. Now I'm interacting with them online more than ever, but I feel like they are only seen as political pawns. And I think it's really important for writers to now, I think there was a moment where it was really important for all the Iranian writers to write about the experience of the revolution and the Iran-Iraq war. And I'm so grateful for that literature. And I was sort of, now I'm, in my 40s, I was sort of the bridge of writing about the diaspora. And so my hope is that we can see even more literature about the diaspora while still exploring its connection to our homelands. My big tragedy right now is that I can't go back to Iran. I would love nothing more. And there was even a moment this period where I actually, during the trauma of the last few months, it was around the George Floyd moment, where I actually suddenly couldn't think in English anymore. And I only started thinking in Farsi, and people would talk to me in English, and I would just, because Persian is my first language, but of course I speak English, I suddenly couldn't. And I just started to feel a little bit alienated from where we were. So I think what I would really suggest for people who are interested in Iranian experiences, I would really suggest a very like a balanced diet, a varied diet. I would suggest instead of like even just one or two books, I would say read Azar Nafisi, read Marjane Satrapi, and then read Dalia Sofer, read, there's so many people that are coming out now. It's just like pick and choose and read a little bit of everyone, the Muslim, the Jewish, the Christian, the Baha'i, and I think that's the best way to really get a sense of us instead of making up the reps,
Precisely, and that was a bit of a trick question as well, right? Because you can read all of those and still not get the Iranian experience, right? Because we are reading all these. I mean, I remember reading American authors in Nigeria and British authors, and I never thought that I was reading them to understand America, right? Or to understand Britain. So just the sort of authoring that happens sometimes when it comes to literature from elsewhere, as opposed to literature from here. It gets very frustrating. So I'm happy that I'm not the only one. I was really glad to hear you sort of echo the same sense of frustration.
It's kind of like an honor that we sometimes get to speak for like our country, and I love that. But at the same time, I have so much anxiety around that because I want to bring in like 50 other writers with me every single time and say like, no, I'm only here because also these people are here. And so I also think like so many of our cultures were just simply more community minded, and I always think of like everything in a communal way rather than like the act of writing is so solitary and so solo. It's always the hardest like issue with it, where I just want it every day after when you go to residencies, you have dinners with writers. I always love that part.
Yeah, I love that too. But I have to say that you're a much braver person than I am. Like I would never, like if anybody sort of thought of me as author of my writing as represented in Nigeria, I think that the weight of it would just crush me. I think my writing represents me and what I write. I don't think anyone could pay me enough, to, I don't know, I think that maybe that's the job, I don't know, for the tourism board or something, right?
It's terrifying, and like I'm not comfortable with it for sure. It's a very difficult like position, and I always remind people that there's a mix of course our luck and talent and all these things, but it's also the literary world. My dream was that the literary world would look like you and I one day, and that people like us would be in positions of power. Because every once in a while you hear people say like, well, why do you want to jury all these things? Why do you want to be a judge on every prize? It's like, because it was my dream to have a voice. Because when I was very young, it really felt like all I ever read or ever was exposed to was like the Western canon. And my dream was that you and I would get to sit with like a stack of books and like select things, And so I'm excited we live in that world. There's still work to be done, but
You're here, so am I too. Absolutely.
And I think that's like also the writers that we have here too are such a like we never had to like worry about diverse, pick one person. It's just, we tend to read this stuff, I think, and that's why we were chosen for these positions. Because when I pitch books, it's just this is the stuff I read, this is the stuff I'm drawn to. So for me, it just felt so natural working on this jury. Like
and books create communities, they say, right? And we're just sort of really, really nice to be part of the of this community, contributing to the diversity, of the American project or whatever you want to call it. And I'm grateful for prizes like this, not only for introducing me to reintroducing me to work that I already knew and getting lots of free books, but also introducing me to writers that I didn't know before. I mean, I had so much fun reading books from writers from everywhere and sort of seeing their insider perspective sometimes, of the United States, right? And there were times when reading Ishmael's book, for example, I know that it's set in an unnamed African country, but there were times I could have sworn that was Nigeria. Right. And then reading Horace's book, we had Kingsway in Nigeria, and there were things that Kingsway did that was like, okay, this guy has got to be Nigerian, right? And then Excel. Who names their sons Excel if you're not Nigerian? So we have all these, all these weird connections that you find in books that absolutely did not have me in mind when they were writing it, but they did on a very subconscious level, and they didn't know that, right? So it was sort of it was very interesting too.
I think that's also the interesting thing, like thinking about the psychology of readers at different levels too, and like what it means to be an American and what America actually includes and how people read books. I mean, I think every time I read anything, I always think of the Iranian perspective too, because that's always how my brain is like wired. You know, it's always like, what's the American, what's the Iranian, and that's actually one of the only reasons I've, you know, as the political situation with Iran has gotten, you know, worse in a lot of ways. You know, that's why I'm more adamant about using Iranian and American. I used to be like, just call me an American writer, I'm here now, blah, blah. But now it's almost like I almost want to mostly be seen as an Iranian writer. And it's also like a thing that I think happens when we get older, maybe. Like I'm suddenly thinking much more of my ancestors and like what they would do in these situations. I don't know. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, yeah. And then also the catalog copy and all these things too. I found that fascinating too, like how publishers wanted to present our authors to us. Yeah. Like I'm endlessly fascinated by that, the good and the bad, you know, like.
When you were talking about roots and being rooted, I'm Igbo, and Igbo people are very often really rooted. And I can't think of myself as anything but Igbo and then Nigerian. And it doesn't matter, you know, how long I've lived elsewhere. You know, the only time I sort of feel like, yes, I'm home is when the plane lands at Murtala Mohammed Airport, Lagos, and I sort of take in that stench, and it really stinks sometimes. And I take in that stench, and I'm like, yes, you know, yes, I'm home. And then I get to Enugu, and I'm standing on, you know, the balcony of the house that I grew up in, and I, you know, I exhale. So all the while I'm away from Nigeria, and I've been away from Nigeria for a long time. And even when I do go back, I go back for very short periods. I always feel like I'm holding my breath, and I don't exhale until I get home, right? Which is very funny, because I also know that I'm not going to go back to live in Nigeria. I'm never going to relocate to Nigeria. I mean, it's almost impossible to do that, because my husband is, you know, he doesn't want to live in Nigeria. He's done that. He's been there. He has the T-shirt, you know. So, for my kids, Nigeria is a place where their mother is from. It's not where they are from. So I'm not going to do that to them either. But it's interesting, you know, how like our roots sort of still can have that sort of hold on us, even when we know that it's not likely that we'll ever go back, right?
Right. Yeah, it is kind of amazing. You know, for me, I was only in Iran for a few years, but it's like the way that I still like hold onto it. And, you know, the fact that like, as we saw in some of these books too, there's a representation of families, you know, that are in this country, but still are very much holding on to their, you know, we never, my parents and I still only speak Persian. We only eat Persian food, you know, we always take our shoes off. We have our own customs. We observe like Muslim traditions, things like that. And so I think that's also like one of the things that I love about thinking about people here, like the private life of immigrants. So she saw so beautifully with these books. I mean, I think the representation of that was so beautiful and so honest and so lovely.
Mm-hmm. But one of the most profound things, I think, you said a lot of profound things, but the one that really stayed with me is you saying that you could only think or speak Farsi to people right after the whole George Floyd thing. I mean, that's so powerful. I'm going to be thinking on it a lot.
It was so bizarre. I couldn't speak English. I felt like I really couldn't engage with this country. I was in a really weird state of trauma that linked to like LA riots and all these horrible things in my childhood. It was just horrifying. But yeah, I think I've been thinking about that a lot too, like using tongues.
Are you going to write about it, or should I?
Yeah, I mean, it's like...
Well, I'm constantly... Because I think I'm constantly thinking of dislocation and loss of language, you know, and how, what do you lose when you move, right? And what do you gain? What do you sacrifice, you know, to be part of somewhere else? Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, what would it have looked like differently?
Yeah.
I love talking to you. It's great. I hope we can continue these conversations again. This is so wonderful. And like, again, so honored and so fun. And well, now we have the rest of our wonderful evening. Are we doing the intro for the next one? Who is we got a signal.
Okay, so it is my honor to introduce Ishmael Beer. Ishmael Beer's first book, A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier, was the #1 New York Times bestseller and has been published in more than 40 languages. Among other work on behalf of young people affected by war, Beer is a UNICEF ambassador and advocate for children affected by war, and a member of the Human Rights Watch Children's Rights Advisory Committee. That's a long one. He lives in Los Angeles with his wife and their children. Of his novel, Little Family, We the Judges had this to say. Beer documents their emotional and physical struggles to survive in language that is both gorgeous and lyrical.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chika, and for the introduction and for the conversation that you had with Poroshita. Salom, Kubi. I was great. Farsi. That's not Igbo. That was Farsi for her. I wanted to start tonight by basically talking a little bit about how I became a writer, and then maybe read a few things from Little Family. I started writing out of necessity, in the sense that I was writing to give context to an experience that most people did not know anything about, but yet we had a lot of people writing about it, and I wanted to correct certain things. And that was the experience of being a child in war. I'd arrived in this country. I know you guys were talking about being immigrants in this country, but I'd arrived as an immigrant. But in addition to that, with what was considered the burden, because I was a young person coming from extreme situation of violence. So most people immediately wrote me off. I was not supposed to amount to anything. I was not supposed to be intelligent. I was not supposed to think, just because my life had been in war. My early foundation had been in war. And so I wanted to change the conversation for people to understand that surviving war requires intelligence and a strength of character, particularly for a child. You basically are thinking more than most adults would ever think in their lives. For a lot of Americans, particularly nowadays, Americans that are not like us, who are coming from other places to be Americans, for them, this is their first crisis. COVID-19 is the first crisis they've lived through, whereas we have lived through so many. This is just another one. So for me, I wanted to give words, and it started when I would apply for school. My adoptive family would take me to apply for schools, and nobody wanted to take me in because I did not have what was required to determine that I had been in school before. Even though I spoke English to people, it's not my first or second or third or fifth or seventh language. But still, that was insufficient. So I needed a report card. And I didn't have one because, again, when you run from home, you're not thinking of your report card. You're not thinking, hey, let me take my report card so that I'll end up in New York someday and present it to a school principal, So I remember making those jokes, but people didn't find it funny. They probably went on to their conclusions that I was more traumatized, the fact that I was making a joke about something they found really horrific. So my first essay was an essay that was about why I do not have a report card. It was titled. And in that essay, I explained that some people don't have report cards because this is where they may be coming from. It doesn't make them less intelligent or that you cannot admit them in schools. Anyway, so from that moment on, I had an inkling that for me, because I did not have certain things to provide physically, words had become a way to replace those things through imagery, through remembering, through writing. I can show people that I existed prior to when they encountered me, that I had a life, that had a context that is often not spoken of. In my new book, Little Family, which is my third book and my second novel, I wanted to answer the question about what freedom means to young people nowadays, particularly on the African continent. I did not name a country, and as Chika had mentioned, because this could apply anywhere in the world. And us, actually, for a matter of fact, as I was writing this book, I lived in Nigeria. I lived in Abuja for 2 years. So you saw traces of that in the book, in my imagination. And I lived in other African countries, in Mauritania, in Senegal, and in my country, Sierra Leone, to write this book. I wanted to answer this question about what freedom means for young people, wherein you have the push and pull of tradition, modernism, the importation of ideas and ways of being, and what you consider liberty to be for you. So I decided to create 5 characters that lived on an abandoned plane, which is a relic of their country's past, and for them to basically, they are marginalized from their own society because they want to live as freely as possible. And so through their interaction with the larger society, you get to see what it is that this means. And most importantly, the point that I'll make before I read a little bit is that I wanted people to understand that when people are marginalized in any context, whether it's a society, in any group, they actually are the ones who understand the inner workings of that society that they're marginalized from. Because they don't only see the good side of it, they see the worst of it, the holes through which they could function through it. So they're actually more in touch with that society than people who are doing very well. For example, I live in Los Angeles. The average person in Pacific Palisades does not understand what goes on in America more than the person who's actually not, lives on the street. They pay more attention to how the society doesn't work because they experience it directly. So they are more the economists, the philosophers, the anthropologists of that society more than anybody else. So I wanted these characters to have that kind of agency. Also, I decided to infuse this with a little bit of background of a colonial history in most of these African countries, and what that does to the mechanism. Even I discuss one of the things that I think I'm very proud of about Nigerians is how much they keep to their names. They don't have as many colonial names as the rest of the other African countries, where, like you have, there are certain people who are African and they have names that if they call that name, if you don't look at them, you would not think they're a Black person. They'll have like Lightfoot Boston. Like, who would name their kid Lightfoot Boston? That's a big colonial burden, in my opinion. But anyway, so I try to play on with those kinds of things. I also try to play on about food, even what food does to who we are as human beings. Where we choose to eat, to show how sophisticated we are, says a lot about how much we bought into the identity of the other, or the identities that have been placed on us. So anyway, I'll read a little bit, and I'm happy that Chika, you love Kudimata because she's one of my favorite characters. This is the main character. I wanted to write from the perspective of a Black girl who has agency, Black African girl who has agency, one who is intelligent, but one who's also trying to define what her femininity is based on her own terms, not based on anybody else's, which often you find. I became a father. My first child was a girl. She's now 6 years old. And I always knew certain things, but I think because of that, I realized how the world was made for men to succeed in it more so than anything. And how even at a very young age, men starts to determine how a woman should showcase their womanhood or femininity. And this happened to me. I was on a boat coming from Gorée Island into Dakar, Senegal. And there were some older people and some younger people chatting about my daughter, who they said, well, we know she's a girl, but why don't the parents pierce her ears so we know immediately she's a girl? And this really tormented me a lot. And needless to say that I resisted in throwing them overboard in the boat, because I thought to myself, what is there for a man to begin that discussion, even to say what a woman or girl should be? It is not the business of any man. So that fed into Kudimata, how I wrote Kudimata, those moments. So I'll read a little bit from her. So anyway, so this is the book, Little Family. And I'll just read a little bit and I'll jump to another area. So Kudimata, who's one of the 5 characters, is the main character and who narrates the book most of the time. This is meeting her the first time. Usually, Kudimata made her visits to the market between dawn and the first appearance of the sun. There was a pause that came at this hour, a sigh. when the waking had to decide whether to spend their day being useful or being destructive. Raffia bag slung over her shoulder, beanie on her head, this bright-eyed young woman of 18 with smooth, sharp cheekbones chose to remain suspended between the two, as the circumstances dictated. Besides, she was drawn to the hidden beauty of this dilapidated place, which painted over whatever bad memories troubled her mind, with the simple and intriguing brushstrokes of all that was on display. She glided among the traders, listening and watching as they called out to the passers-by, letting them know what they wanted, what was essential for them to purchase. Madame, I have a special gift for your lovely daughter. Or Mister, don't you want to go home with a gift that says what doesn't exist in words? I have just that for you. The merchants had sweet words for almost everyone, but when Kudimata passed before them, they said nothing. It was as if she did not exist. She was not invisible. People's eyes caught sight of her, but somehow she was forgotten as soon as she was glimpsed. Kudimata did not mind. Because of her invisibility, people spoke honestly around her about their fears, hopes, and dreams. Sometimes she picked up important information that way, information that made it possible to continue to live at the edge of the lives of such people. Some mornings, she simply lingered upon their faces, living in the emotions that they wore. Some exceptionally happy, some pensive, some unthinkably sad. Imagine their lives, help her to stay suspended between being useful and being destructive while turning to advantage everything that happened. Now she watched as a fruit seller juggled a pinkish red mango, a yellow pawpaw, and a green guava in the air before setting them on a platter as colorful as a flowered roll. Kudi took in the glistening red of the palm oil being poured into bottles, the deep green of the cassava and sweet potato leaves that were constantly sprinkled with water so they didn't lose their freshness to the sun. The shiny dark hand that sprinkled the water, the head wraps of women so casual yet so elegant, the blue river nearby, the pink sand on its banks. She never tired of the pleasures of letting herself get swept away by such sights. Delighted that their delight never grew stale. How could you not find in them some tolerance for whatever life threw at you? The moment of sigh arrived, and the boisterous place seemed to freeze for a moment. The traders stopped mid-sentence, the echo of the last words they had said reverberating in the atmosphere. Their hands paused midway to wiping the sweat from their foreheads, their lips on the verge of bright smiles, their rumpled brows in the act of releasing sorrow. Kodimata created a snapshot with her eyes that she could revisit later when she was in need of something other than her life. Normally, she would not stop, but today she came upon a strange sight. A man was sitting on the ground wearing khaki shorts, a long-sleeve shirt, brown boots, and brim khaki hat. He looked like one of those white men in the book she had read back when she was a schoolgirl, when she was living with a family who had let her stay with them a while. She paused the memory aside and concentrated instead on the image that came to mind from one of those long-forgotten books. There were always photos of those white men standing in the bow of a boat rowed by a man so shiningly dark that he became the only point of intensity in the photo. In each photograph, the boat seemed to be heading up or down a river to discover what she did not understand then or now. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to read a little short one, and then I'll give it up to you guys. So when Kudimata goes to the market, every day the little family members will go to the market and they will return. And when they return, they have a secret whistle that opens this world that they created away from the world. And it basically sounds king's property, everything is correct. And then somebody will respond, everything is correct, because they know what the answer is to the whistle. And that's how they would determine that nobody was intruding in their environment, in this little world they've created. So basically, I want to whistle that because for a while I was hoping somebody would whistle it, and in my head, this is the whistle I heard. So it basically goes. So that would be the response to the entry. Anyway, because when I'm writing, I'm also thinking about the musicality of the places that we come from. Earlier, you guys were talking about language and the importance of it, of where we come from, to be here where we embrace English language as our daily language. And for me, when I write, since I started writing, none of my characters speak English to me. So I'm always translating when I'm writing. I have yet to wait the day that my character will speak English to me, then that will be my American novel set in the United States of America. So then I will know it's time. Until then, I think all my characters are always speaking all kinds of other languages to me, and I have to find translations, which often the English language doesn't have the equivalents, but you have to find the words to do that. Now I'll read just a short bit, and then as we're coming up on my time here. So one of the things that the little family does is that they go to this place called the night market, where it's basically where people who are the margins of society are able to relax for the evening and have a banter, have a conversation, talk about politics, talk about what's going on. And I wanted to read this little bit of it. And the night market was a real escape. It was the only place outside their home where the little family didn't feel the need to pretend not to be together. Like them, most people came to the market after they had finished searching the day and needed a bit of a break. They came to smell what they couldn't afford to eat, to imagine what seemed impossible for them in the grainy television sets people clustered around at the sides of stalls or mounted at the entrance of bars and in the mannerisms of those better off than they were. To be sure, the group had to keep their wits about them. They usually arrived early and found a place to sit behind the glow of kerosene lamps and dull bulbs powered by improbably loud generators. If they had money, they bought a couple of beers to share and some cheap food, stone-hard bread with boiled peanuts or cubed sugar sprinkled with water. Over the din, bits and pieces of banter reached them. One night, not long before, a young man waiting in line to get bread, butter, and tea had called out to no one in particular, "Why do we always have to stand in line for everything in this country?" "Hey, you are only asking because you are at the back of the line," someone ahead of him replied, and the whole line burst into laughter. Someone else was playing music from a popular radio station on a phone with the volume cranked up so others could enjoy it. "If I get money, the song blared. I'm sure Chika knows the song. Echoing the same music coming out of loudspeakers in the distance. Most people mouthed the lyrics, entertaining the dreams the music suggested. At the end of the song, the radio host made the announcements. "Tomorrow, we will have a discussion about whether our politicians should be called corrupt or thieves. If you steal rice at the market, are you not a thief? Join us in the AM and call in to be part of the conversation." And now, more music from own reggae superstar with a new song, Mr. Politi Corruption, or "You Are Not Fit to Be Called My Leader." The host sang along a bit as the song filled the airwaves. The gatherers laughed and some began humming along. "Ah, if you steal, you're a thief. Simple as that," someone called out, sparking a boisterous debate. "No, correction. If you are poor and you steal, then you're a thief. If you're a politician, then you're corrupt." This joking rebuttal brought about more laughter. "Look at this watch. I corrupted it today." A young fellow stood in the middle of the informal circle brandishing a gold watch. The crowd murmured and laughed, handing the new term around and marking it part of the ever-changing local parlance. And the little family listened and took notes, eating and drinking as slowly as they could to prolong their enjoyment, keeping at bay the unwelcome memories that grew more restive at night. So basically, in this conversation, because what I was trying to see also is that the languages that I come from, and I'm sure most of you that are here tonight, and I'm really honored to be in the presence of Leslie and Vanessa, the other writers who will speak really shortly. And thank you for selecting our work and for this conversation tonight. The places that we come from, language is ever changing. In Sierra Leone, we have what we call Creole, which is Pidgin in Nigeria. It's the same thing. But that language is alive and it changes every day. For example, if I haven't been in Sierra Leone for 3 months, and I go back, I will have to catch up with the new addition to the language. So the language is constantly changing. And it will take me maybe a day or two, and then I'll know what the new local additions are. And so if you talk to people back home constantly, then you're in touch with it. So it comes from also what's going on. So it's a living history. So for example, what they decided to add, which is corrupt, after that conversation, to corrupt became part of stealing something. So now nobody will say, oh, I stole something. But, oh, I corrupted something yesterday. Because if the politicians steal and they are called corrupt, why should the poor man who steals bread be called a thief? So then this comes into the way language evolves and how people evolve, how they're thinking, and how they understand their environment also evolves. So I wanted to add this musicality and how people deal with this ever-changing life in their lives as well as constantly changing in this context. I would wrap up a little bit by talking about oral tradition in the way I write. I grew up, before I went to school, I grew up in a very remote part of Sierra Leone. Before I went to school, I already knew structures of stories because I grew up in a place where stories were considered to be medicine that are poured into you to strengthen you so that you'll be able to face life. And the belief is that life would always try to break you, no matter where you are, no matter what you do. But with stories that are infused in your bloodstream, in your veins, you will be able to repair yourself in a way that's more wholesome. So for me, when I write, I always think stories as medicine that I pour into the world to move humanity a little bit along, a little bit further than anything. But I mentioned earlier also that in the oral tradition also, and I talked about language, how when you look at the oral tradition, you realize that certain words we didn't have and were only introduced into the language because of the encounter with the other, really. For example, in Sierra Leone and my particular tribe, which is Mende, we are not as well known as the Igbo, but I think if we dig deep, we maybe relate to them somehow. We don't have a word for bicycle. We just call it bicycle, or we talk about the bell, the sound of the bell that the bike does. So when I started writing, I realized, as I mentioned earlier, that English is not sufficient to sometimes say the things that I want to say. So for me, when I write, even though English is not my language, it's a colonial language, the way I use English is very much an ownership of that language and my own. Certain words that I use, the average English speaker or the native, I don't like that word, but the native English speaker may not even know how to use those words. I remember when my first book came out, my editor and I had a big argument about, she did not want me to use the word jubilate. She said, nobody used the word jubilate. I see Chika is laughing because people use that word every day. They'd be like, oh yeah, we jubilated yesterday, but an average American would not use the word jubilate. Because I also believe that language fits landscape. When you write, you have to use the language where your characters live and inhabit for that to be part of it. So I will leave you with just a few things and I'll finish. In my language, Mende, when you say night came suddenly, in Mende, you say the sky rolled over and changed its size. That's basically a translation in English. There's no word for it. So obviously, if I have the choice to say night came suddenly or the sky rolled over and changed its size, I will use the latter because it's more interesting. But also the reader will know exactly where you are. You know that you're not in New York or Boston or wherever, So anyway, I want to thank you all again for choosing our work. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Leslie and Vanessa. And thank you very much. This is such an honor and a treat to have, particularly in these times where we need such stories to strengthen our spirit. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that. Next up is Leslie Tenorio, who is the author of the novel, The Son of Good Fortune, and the story collection, Monstrous, named a Book of the Year by San Francisco Chronicle. He's the recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Whitney Award, a Stegner Fellowship, and the Rome Prize from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, as well as residencies from the MacDowell Colony, Yadu, and the Boliaisco Foundation. His stories have appeared in The Atlantic, Zoetrope, All Story, Plowshares, and have been adapted for the stage by the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. and the Mayi Theater in New York City. Leslie is a professor at St. Mary's College of California. And of Leslie's novel, Will the Judges Had This to Say, The Son of Good Fortune is compulsively readable. With its cast of unforgettable characters and delightful prose, Tenorio has delivered a near-perfect novel. Now, over to you, Leslie.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Institute for Immigration Research and to the judges, and congratulations to Ishmael and Vanessa. I'm really honored that that our books could be recognized together, and I'm so appreciative for this award, and I'm just grateful that our books can somehow contribute to the mission of the Institute. I know we're running a little behind, so I don't want to take up too much time. So I'm just going to read a page, and thank you again for this award. I really appreciate it. So this, The Son of Good Fortune is the story of Excel, a young Filipino undocumented immigrant who lives in California, and his mother, Maxima, who's also undocumented. She is a former B-action movie star in the Philippines turned online internet scam artist. She dupes unwitting American men to fall in love with her online and wire her money as needed. It's sort of her way of making her way into the world. In the book, you find out that every birthday, Maxima tells Excel the story of his birth. As it happens, he was born on a plane. She'd hoped to come to the States and have her baby in California, but as luck had it, he was born in the sky and above the ocean, as she likes to say. So I'm gonna just read that quick story that Maxima explains to Excel every year for his birthday. And thank you so much for listening, and thank you for the ceremony and for the award. I really appreciate it. Maxima would tell the story like this. She's 8 months pregnant when she boards a Philippine Airlines flight bound from Manila to San Francisco. It's her first time in a plane, in a window seat, no less. Takeoff makes her nervous, but once the plane is steady in the sky, she relaxes. She thinks she might even enjoy the feeling of being in the air. She won't pay for headphones, but she watches Moonstruck. She likes Cher's movies, but not her music. On the video screen up front, manages to follow the plot even if she can't hear the characters speak. The in-flight dinner is so-so, chop suey, salad, a buttered roll, but what she loves is eating them out of small trays with their own compartments. In America, she thinks, she'll eat all her meals like this. It's a 17-hour flight. By the 5th hour, Maxima can feel how pregnant she really is. Her seat is like a fist squeezing her body. Her back aches, her feet swell, and the passenger to her left, a nun who looks like she's 15, hogs the entire armrest. But America is the only choice, Maxima tells herself, her only hope. What's left for her back home? She has no job, no income, no family. The movies don't want her anymore. She's finally rid of the eye patch wearing son of a bitch, better to raise her baby on her own anyway. And her sister, Queenie, her only real family, is trapped in Saudi Arabia forever. She'll be a live-in maid until the day she dies. But thank God for Joker. Still loyal after all these years. He's promised her a good place to live, will help arrange whatever paperwork she and the baby will need to stay in California. Had she known it would be this easy, maybe she would have come a long time ago. But then the plane shakes, hard as an earthquake, despite no solid ground beneath. The captain requests all passengers take their seats and fasten their seatbelts, but Maxima feels too miserably pregnant to buckle up, so she just grips her armrest, the one against the wall, since the nun still won't share, and she whispers a prayer to herself and her baby. Let us fly through the air safely, she says. Let us land on the ground softly. But the side-to-side shaking, Maxima fears, will somehow hurt the baby, and now she wonders if leaving home is her all-time #1 mistake, if the smartest thing a person can do is stay in the place where you were born. The turbulence ends, the plane cruises again. Maxima closes her eyes just to rest them, then falls into a sleep so deep she dreams she's already in America, lying in a clean, comfortable bed with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, until the room tilts one way, then the other, then forward, then back, and the dream becomes an earthquake, one so real that she's jolted awake, But instead of the plane's violent shaking or sudden plunge, her body seems to pop. She inhales sharply, feels a warmth gushing over her seat, down her thighs and legs, then everywhere. Maxima has been punched, kicked, judo flipped, has even rolled out of a moving Jeep, but her body was trained. She always knew how to get back up. Now, squeezed in her window seat, she's helpless against the pain. She looks at the snoring nun beside her, taps her shoulder several times. "Excuse me, sister," she says, "excuse me?" But the nun just sleeps, so Maxima pounds her fist like a hammer on the nun's thigh, and the nun shrieks awake. "Help me," Maxima says. In minutes, 3 flight attendants walk Maxima to the front of the plane, where they've cleared the final 2 rows in first class. With great luck, the plane is full of nurses, Filipinos hoping for work in the US hospitals, and 4 of them tend to Maxima. They give her water, dab her face and neck with cold towels. They time her contractions. They come and go in shifts except for one, a male nurse named Rocky, who has been close by from the beginning and will be there until the end. "Huwag kang mag-alala," he says. "Don't worry, honey, you're in good hands." He fans her with what Maxima realizes is her own plane ticket, so that she sees, flitting back and forth just above her face, her name and confirmation number, XL0426. "XL," she whispers to herself. "XL, XL, XL." The rhythm of the letters like an incantation, a one-word prayer. Rocky leans closer, not quite hearing her. "XL," she says, "so that whenever I say my baby's name, it also means be good, be the best." She takes a deep breath and nods to herself. "XL, diba?" More turbulence, a jolt, and XL is born. His arrival, the end of Maxima's story. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Vanessa Hua. And here is her bio. Vanessa Hua is a columnist of the San Francisco Chronicle. She's the author of Deceit and Other Possibilities and A River of Stars. A National Endowment of the Arts Fellow, she received an Asian Pacific American Award for Literature, a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, a Steinbeck Fellowship in Creative Writing, and the San Francisco Foundation's James D. Phelan Award for Fiction. She's received fellowships and support from Breadloaf, Aspen Summer Words, Voice of Our Nation, Community of Writers at SQUA, and Napa Valley Writing Conferences. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Frontline World, PRI's The World, The Atlantic, Ziziva, Guernica, and elsewhere. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and twins. She teaches at the Writers Grotto, Warren Wilson MFA's program for writers, and elsewhere. And this is our little judge's citation. Hua delivers one of those once-in-a-lifetime debuts that feels both remarkably established and yet thrillingly new.
Thank you so much, Poetrista and all the judges. It's a dream come true to be honored this way tonight with Leslie and Ishmael. And thanks to all of you who are tuning in. Just this past hour, listening to their, everyone's stories and words has been wonderfully inspiring. So, and I think something that I have been thinking about is just going back to that idea that immigrants and immigrant families are not a monolith, and we just see just the gripping, compelling stories that we're all trying to write that reflect the world that we live in. So I'm going to read a bit from Deceit and Other Possibilities, published by Counterpoint. Grateful to my publisher. And when people ask me what my book's about, I say model minorities behaving badly. So it's 13 stories written over the course of a decade and a half. I write stories that cross race, gender, orientation, all sorts of things, and just written with the hope that we might begin to understand the choices that people make, even if we don't agree with them. I'm going to read, and I think in writing these stories, my hope is that it might help a reader out there feel made visible, might open the way for other writers to feel like that they too have a story they want to tell, and to just, really help bring us together. So I'll be reading just a short excerpt from the story, The Older the Ginger. Sometime after lunch, old Zhang realized he'd been kidnapped. On the way from the airport, his cousin had taken a detour. If he'd driven in circles or gone in the wrong direction, old Zhang wouldn't have known the difference. In the countryside west of Hong Kong on the Pearl River Delta, the rutted roads looked alike, and the flash of return, of welcome, hadn't yet arrived. More than a half century ago, he left the hills green with pine and bamboo for San Francisco and hadn't returned since. His cousin wasn't the son of an aunt or an uncle, but a relative of some kind from the village. Less than an hour into the drive, his cousin parked at a restaurant. They were the only customers at the only table, and the only staff, his cousin's daughter, Little Treasure. It was startling to find himself in high demand after his years among the bachelors of Chinatown. Finding a wife had been a competitive endeavor, and old Zhang hadn't much to differentiate himself as a suitor, just another waiter turned cook. Then his mother had written, insisting old Zhang marry. She was 93, he was 76. Come back, she told him. Come back and find a wife. Little Treasure dropped off toothpicks and a bowl of lychees and poured another cup of tea, but he refrained from drinking. He had a long ride ahead to the village. His leaky bladder didn't need more pressure, and the strong brew made him jittery. A few minutes ago, his cousin had excused himself to urinate, and old Zhang should too. But when he tried to turn the handle of the door, it didn't budge. It must be stuck, the wooden frame warped and swollen. Hey, hey, he shouted. Little Treasure tugged on his elbow. Uncle, eat, she said. She looked at him coyly from beneath her lashes. Does it taste like how you remember? We filled ours with air, he said. During his childhood, his family ate meat only once a year during the spring festival, but this young girl had never known such want, only China on the rise and none of its turmoil. He knocked again and leaned his weight against the door, locked. He searched for another exit, but didn't see another door, and the sole window was too small to squeeze through. He'd heard of brides abducted by grooms, but never a kidnapped groom. His cousin must want to present his daughter to old Zhang, to make her the first and most memorable candidate for marriage and the green card that came along with the deal. In time, she could sponsor her parents, her siblings, their spouses, and their children to immigrate, a prize her father wouldn't let slip out of his fingers. Uncle, eat. Little Treasure had a broad, plain face, placid as a cow, her beauty residing in the cascade of inky black hair that fell to her waist. In a tight t-shirt and flared jeans, she was as tall as him and twice as strong, with the muscular arms of a model revolutionary. She could level weeds and enemies alike. She could pin him to the narrow bed that he now noticed beneath a calendar of beer models. Uncle, he'll be back soon, she said. Sit, sit, you've had a long flight. Her hand crept to his thigh. He pushed it away. Let me help you, she whispered. Her face burned. He shuffled away, wondering if his cousin was spying through a crack, trying to catch old Zhang in an indelicate position. And who could blame him? China was becoming a superpower that launched astronauts into space, put on Olympics breathtaking in scale and magnificence, and might soon become the Middle Kingdom around which the world revolved. But for now, his cousin and Little Treasure remained mired in this backwater where old Zhang presented the best and only prospects. Little Treasure wept, burying her face into her hands. Young maiden, he began. Young, she asked. Her cheeks glittered with tears. You should see who they have picked out for you. Girls pried from their dolls. I'm a leftover woman. You don't want an old ginger root like me, he said. The older the ginger, the hotter the spice, she said. When is he coming back, he asked. As long as it takes. She sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. You're my last chance. You're not old enough to be thinking about the end, he said. No one wants meat that's gone off, she said. Call your father, he said. She pushed the lychees toward him, which he ate to cleanse his greasy mouth. He spat the shiny pit into his cupped palm, and he had another, savoring the sweetness. His mother used to peel lychees for him, digging in her thumbnail to break the flesh. Old Zhang had been his mother's firstborn and her favorite. When he was very young, he followed her to the river where she beat laundry against the rocks. How mighty she'd seemed, warm mud squishing between his toes, sunshine heavy on his cheek, and the smell of the river, of wind on water and churned earth. Little Treasure cleared the table, and he smelled the dank musk of her, straw and loamy soil, and all at once he remembered his boyhood, the life he'd left behind, and he was overcome with longing for this lost world. He closed his eyes, inhaling. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm having a problem with audio. Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was amazing. And thank you to everyone. Thank you so much, Leslie, for your wonderful book. And thank you to the finalists, too. It was a real honor for us. And Chica, I'm speaking for you, but I think you feel the same.
Great. So thank you, Ishmael and Vanessa and Leslie, for sharing your words with us and for sharing your works with us. We absolutely enjoyed the books, and I encourage everybody out there to, run and buy a copy and buy copies for friends and for everybody that you know and you love, and even for those you don't love. And congratulations to Leslie for winning this year's New Voices Award.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Congratulations, and thank you, Leslie. I am Jennifer DeSanto, Chair of the Fall for the Book Board of Directors, and on behalf of everyone at the Fall for the Book, we congratulate all of the finalists, Ishmael, Vanessa, and Leslie. We are honored to be recognizing these extraordinary books tonight. You can find all 3 books, as well as books by this year's judges, at the links below. I would like to mention this award was made possible due to the generosity of our esteemed benefactor, Diane Portnoy. Thank you to the Institute for Immigration Research, Diane Portnoy, Denzel Mohammed, and Jim Whitty for championing the New American Voices Award, immigrant writers, and for the important work they do to support immigrants and their families across the country. Fall for the Book's virtual events continue through November. Please visit fallforthebook.org for the full schedule, and thank you for joining us tonight. Read on.